So first things first, everybody's been on Zoom a lot. So take a second. You can stand up if you want to. You don't have to do anything that feels embarrassing or weird. You can take yourself off video, but you're a person with a body. You can take a stretch up with your hands over your head. You can take a stretch down towards your feet. You can take a deep breath. Shake yourself out. Everything that comes into this world, translation, writing, otherwise, it has to move through our bodies somehow, even if, we're typing through our brain with some kind of assistive technology. We are embodied creatures. So that's a good reminder to start with. Yeah, so the next thing that I like to do is usually talks. They usually end with a Q&A. I like to start with a Q&A because we're never starting with an empty room. So I'm gonna stick a little Google form in the chat, and it's gonna ask you two questions, which are, what are you curious about? And then what do you already know? And so if you want to, everything here is challenge by choice. You can click into that, fill her out. While you're throwing some questions and thoughts in, I'm going to say the short version of the story of how I came to this work, which is, it's a tale of laziness and rebellion. I was at Middlebury College's Spanish school in a class taught by the incredible, oh my goodness, I'm not sure that I'm going to get her last name right, but Carmen de la Guardia. And she was teaching women's history through their writing. And Arenal was one of the first authors on our reading list. And my Spanish was not super good at the time. This is like my first college level in Spanish class. And I was reading it and I was like, this is so spicy for something from the 1800s. This was not what I was anticipating. And I brought it to Carmen and I was like, is this what I think it is? And she was like, yeah. And so I very badly wanted to understand more of it. And so I went looking for it against the rules in English, and it didn't exist. And I kept seeing all of these coincidences between the political philosophy class I had taken the previous semester and what she was talking about in her writing. And I was like, I desperately need this to exist in English because I need it to get assigned as a primary source in this class because it's too cool. And so knowing nothing about translation, having this be my first ever feminism, women, and gender studies class, I was just like, well, heck, I'll give it a try. And so I brought it to some trusted professors in the Spanish department. And I was like, is it crazy that I'm thinking about doing this? And they were like, I mean, you can give it a shot. We'll support you. And I am forever indebted to mostly Professor Marcos Roena Madrazo in the linguistics and Spanish departments at Middlebury, because he was like, I don't even have that much expertise in translation, but I will support you to give this a shot. And so over the course of the ensuing years, I have been picking away at it, learning about the translation industry. I got to go to the Breadloaf Translators Conference due to Karen Hanta's support, and just really developed my expertise from scratch. I knew nothing about Spanish history when I started. And so it's been this grand scavenger hunt of filling in the gaps. And so when you asked me questions today, I went back and I was like, should I go reread my background essay to reteach myself all of the things that I've tried to learn before? But I trusted that we have enough brilliance here in the room that if I can't answer something, probably someone else will know. So I'm going to check out what results we are getting in from this form. And yeah, chat's always open. Whatever thoughts you end up coming up with are more than welcome to show up there. Let's see here. Okay. Responses. So we got 4 coming in. Okay, what are we curious about? Challenges of translating a feminist thinker, Concepcion Arenal, representing 19th century feminism. Why useful today? When will your translation be finished? I love that question. Great question. Who asked that question? I appreciate you. Oh, Mom and Olga. Debbie's my mom. I love her. She came when I gave my first ever talk on this while I was busy panicking in the library at Middlebury College. Listen to me rehearse. Let's see here. What else do we have? Your process of translation, Arenal's language as a Galician, because I love Portuguese. I think that's Margie, am I right? I love you, Margie. Margie is a local friend who I adore and is one of my COVID bubble. Really curious about how the Spanish language facilitated her work and what were the most difficult parts to translate. Cool. Feminism, translating feminist concepts, translating through time. Yeah, making them feel relevant today. Yeah. What do you know already? That I love you and I'm very proud of you. You're awesome. Aw, read your intro essay. Thank you. Closely studied Michelle. Oh, all right. I'm gonna work on pronunciation here. Michelle Geoffrion Vinci's feminist translation of Rosalia de Castro, dealing mainly with microlinguistic gender issues. I really want to know more about what microlinguistic gender issues are. So whoever tossed that in here, I'm very curious about it. Recently looked at a section of Golden and Age of Enlightenment works dealing with the querelle de fond. I'm gonna, again, pronunciation, and currently studying Concepcion Arenal and Emilia Pardo Bazán. I don't know very much about Emilia Pardo Bazán, but I'm fascinated by her as a being. Written an essay on translating Lorca, though I honestly hardly speak a word of Spanish. That's perfect though. One of the biggest shocks for me about the translation industry and being at the translators conference was how much stunning humility, like I was totally an outsider to this whole world, but the stunning humility that I think comes from maybe always being second author and of never being able to be perfect because you're not in the brain of the person you're trying to like ride sidecar to. And then also listening to people who had limited knowledge of the first language find workarounds for getting it into a second language, whether that's working with a living writer, whether that's, massive use of dictionaries. It was really fascinating. So don't let your lack of knowledge of a language keep you from translation. You will learn so much from doing translation imperfectly, and it's always imperfect. We read this secondary source about somebody who was translating, I believe it was Flaubert, and they were constantly talking about, oh, I'll put that in the next edition. Like, it's never really totally feels done. And, okay, beautiful. Okay, we've got some names, and we've got some people. Great, okay. So, going into questions. And then I'm gonna inshushing myself after, but I'll do my best with these. Challenges of translating, representing 19th century feminism, why useful today. So I'm a little bit of two minds, because there's part of me in the translation that is like, I want it to be her words, and for people to feel that little bit of estrangement you feel when you're reading someone from a different time, but also to feel that same sense of crispness that I felt in encountering her work, even across time. And so a lot of that is just feeling it out in the language. And when I'm looking at two different words, sometimes I'll pick an English word that feels a little bit more archaic, or a phrasing that feels a little bit more archaic, but that hopefully keeps the punch. And okay, why is it useful today? I think one of the things, just for me personally, that ended up feeling useful was to have a stronger concept of Catholic rebellion. I grew up Roman Catholic, and to have a sense of somebody who was reading with and also against her traditions, because a huge piece of her work is kind of vindicating the feminine role as a strength. And I coming from a incredibly strong mom who absolutely, you know, ran life from a point of strength, but also from a point of motherhood. Like, having an author do that and point that out as power and point that out as political power and as something that should legally be empowered was really beautiful. And so when I think about, you know, kind of modern feminist politics, it's like, yes, always both, always strong traditional as an option, and always, you know, challenging norms as a welcome. So I think that that was a big piece of the relevance for me. And yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know, my mom just asked me a good question, was like, does everybody know Concepcion Arenal as like a being? And so she was working, 23 to 90? Is that 1823 to 90? How? Let's find her lifeline here. It's funny that I don't have it memorized. Anybody can chime in if they want to save me from myself here. Oh, I pulled it up somewhere. But basically, I think one of the main, goodness. All right, I'll do a little biographical. There we go. Thank you, Olga. Yeah, 20 to 93. There we go, not 23 to 90. I had it reversed. And basically, her father died when she was young. She grew up with her mother and her grandmother, who were both ridiculously strong people of different minds. Her father ended up in prison for some political things that were going on at the time. I'm not gonna get this perfect, but we're going with it. She had siblings. I believe one of her sisters passed away, and so there was an immense amount of tragedy that happened in her growing up process. And then as she read a bunch at her grandmother's house and kind of got this gradual education, ended up deciding she was going to go to university, did that dressed in men's clothing. While she was there, she met her husband, who then became kind of her co-conspirator in academic and intellectual work. And they had, I think, a couple kids together, one of whom passed away. Her husband passed away. And then she just kept working and writing continually. As she got older, she was good friends with a violinist named Jesus Monasterio, and their friendship is just beautiful. There are these letters between them that are like, oh, my work is like, you know, 15% exhaustion, 20% this, 20% the other things. And it feels like texts between friends. And if I remember, she was good at embroidery, but she didn't like it, or something like that. So that's going to be a very unacademic description of some of the things that I foggily have kept in my brain about her over the ensuing years. But she's amazing. She did work with prisons and with housing reform and with legal reform, and wrote kind of the visitor's manual, basically, for trying to do charity work that got translated within Europe during her time into a bunch of different languages as well. And she started a magazine, and she wrote most of the articles, like ridiculous quantities of work. So that's a little sketch on her. To flop back to, can I get a thumbs up if this is like generally the thing? Okay. Cool. All right, your process of translation. So the actual translation process, I started out with just a Word doc. And there are translators who do this. They will literally just rewrite the work into a separate Word doc. Like, I think Steven Snyder, who helps run language schools at Middlebury, has translated like whole official big ass literary novels just into a Word doc. I was bewildered by this. That seemed too tedious to me. And so I ended up looking up translation software that's actually used for like documentation. And so it will give you two columns, one with the first, language that you're starting in, one with your translation, or with a machine translation. And so you can actually let it, if you don't have a lot of language knowledge, the one that I used was MemSource, MEMSOURCE, and I have no idea if that's industry standard for anything, but it was free and it let me do one document, and so that was what I started with. And so for blocks of text that I wasn't sure on, I would sometimes machine translate them first, get the messy version of it, and then slowly kind of carve and pound it into something that looked like a reasonable paragraph. And then I would bring it to either Marcos, who speaks Spanish and English natively and is from Puerto Rico, so that's his background with Spanish, not 18th century and not Galician Spanish. Or probably sometimes both, would bring it to Ana Sanchez Chico, who was my Spanish language tutor at Middlebury and was a peer. And then we would look at it and I would be like, did I actually get the sense of this right? And sometimes she'd be like, you need to rearrange this, or no, that's just flat out wrong. Or sometimes, and these were always the exciting times, she'd be like, you got it. That was the thing. That's the sense of it. That's how it feels. And sometimes there was specialized language that I didn't know how to deal with. So for example, when she was talking about, there's still a segment of this that I'm a little bit stuck on, because she was talking about different levels of the education system in Spain and was comparing it to the education system in the US. And so I was like, okay, is secondary school the right translation for this? Or is she talking about college? Or is she talking about a teacher training center? Like, how do I get this specialized language in? And in those cases, it was a scavenger hunt. So I would go to Marta Manrique Gomez, who was another professor who worked on the project with me, and I would be like, okay, I have some historical gaps in my knowledge. Can you give me some more reading so that I might be able to get this contextually? Or I have a translator friend named Yvonne Sen who lives near Valencia, but she's from Germany and she also speaks English. And I was telling her about this project and I was like, I'm stuck on this particular segment. And she was able to say, this is this, this is that, this is that. And then I was able to finally be like, check mark. Okay, that segment, move on to the next one. And so it's been very much a scavenger hunt and a lot of layers of revision as my Spanish gets better, and also as my understanding of kind of the cadence of her writing and her style gets better. Because the first run through was very much to get general sense, and then the second run throughs have been to try to, channel her voice. Rose says, have you had any instances where you've had to consciously choose between British and American English in your translation? Interesting. I don't think so, because I've spent a sum total of a week and a half in London with my mom, and so I wouldn't even necessarily know what British English would be in that case. But there is an interesting question there in, how much to try to localize it. And with this being more conceptual, there isn't like, she's talking about some kind of tree outside of her house and I'm trying to figure out what specific kind of tree, if she was living on an island and trying to get a palm tree to translate to a pine tree, or if there's a metaphor. I didn't find a lot of instances of that can happen with more literary writing? Yeah, so the answer to that one would probably be no. I think the bigger challenge is trying to decide how much of the Spanish structure I keep, because her sentences are very tangly, and you get a lot of different clauses in one sentence that you're trying to figure out, well, do I leave it as one flowing thought, or do I try to be kind to my reader by breaking it into more sentences? And do I leave reference ambiguous? This was a big one with gender, where you've got, a pronoun for something, and you're trying to figure out what it's referring to. So it's a she, and you've got potential different things going on. Or you have a masculine pronoun, and then you're trying to decide, is she trying to talk about it from a gender neutral perspective? This happened a ton. Or is she trying to talk about it from a masculine perspective? And so you have to decide how much of a binary she's setting up. And you just kind of have to make a judgment call through what patterning you're seeing. Okay, we've got some more comments. This is great. I'm thinking of a situation recently. It's telling me my internet connection is unstable, so I'm sorry if I get jumpy. With a family autobiographical novel written in Italian, we had a translator for a while, and the question came up, as you're talking about, specialized language and what to do. The debate regarding footnotes, a clear need for this to discuss these items, was bottom of the page or in the appendix. How do you feel about footnotes? Yeah, I feel very, very strong positive about footnotes. I was really grateful for footnotes in the physical copy of the book that I did some of my translation from. I think they're also in the online copy that I used, that I think is referenced in the thing that I put on my website. But it had some historical notes about, contextually what was going on, even when it was written in the Spanish. And so I've been translating those footnotes as I've gone, just to have them. And I don't know what the kind of industry ins and outs are of translating footnotes and attributing those. So that's another question that I have in my head. Let's see here. If anyone's interested in doing this Italian translation, let me know, or Alex. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious in hearing more about it, but this has been enough to bite off so far for full-on projects. How do you find a publisher? Great question. I don't know. I had a little bit of interest from somebody called Green Mountain Press, which does some stuff within Vermont, but I haven't found a broader publisher, and that was part of the reason why I kept not engaging with the collaborative translation, because there was a part of me that was like, I want this to be like my book that is mine and that I can put on my academic shelf and be fancy about and have people be proud of me because I'm the expert on this subject. But then I don't know, I didn't give up on that prospect, but the collaborative translation aspect has been something I've been interested in this whole time, and it's been what it is. At every step of the way, when I was in college, I had people directly to ask, whether it was a professor or a tutor or a friend. And so it feels very much of the feminist mission to bring as many people up with this project as is possible, and to honor as much as I can the plurality of voices that it takes to do the Herculean effort of getting anything from one language to another with any degree of comprehensibility and joy. Okay, I got some more things coming in here. So I've got a question. How do you get your head and heart into Arenal's thoughts and her life to translate her correctly? Do you have to do the translation justice? There's Edna St. Vincent Millay did a thing, I believe, on translating Baudelaire. And she talked about in translation, I think this was what it was. I can look for it afterward if people are interested, send me an email. But she talked about you have to fall in love and get a little bit obsessed with the person that you're translating. And I was like, oh, that's a little much. But as somebody who has a hard time committing to any project, talking to you in 2021 after getting introduced to this in 2016, it's kind of sunk its talons into me a little bit. And there's part of me that's like, shouldn't I be translating somebody who's like more new and progressive? But she's got her claws in me, and so I'm just going with it. And how do I get my head and my heart into her thoughts? A lot of it was biography and really knowing, her life and getting a sense of the emotions that went into such a passion she had for writing and scholarship and sharing her thoughts. And she was a very quiet person. She didn't want a lot of credit. And so now that she's good and dead, I'm intending to get her as much credit as she can get, I guess. Because I think her thoughts are worthwhile. I have a publisher for technical books and we found it via an agent. Yeah, I might want to start looking for an agent. Maybe. I feel like I've done all kinds of complicated things in terms of rights and involving other people in the project. It might be intimidating. And I really want it to exist as an audiobook and as a side-by-side facing English-Spanish copy. I think that would be really fun. My impression is that the possibility of including footnotes or not, or writing a preface for that matter, very much depends on the publisher. On this note, would you like to write a preface to the translated book? Oh, I think it would be fun. Would I like to write one? Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be. She wrote a note to the reader in her initial book, and I would love to write something similar to that riffs on it. And with that, I actually think I will maybe do a quick little reading of one of the current versions. There's a multiplicity of versions because this is one of my favorite parts of the book because it's at the beginning and I've seen it so much. Oh, let's see. Current version of the note to the reader. Better to predict your hostility than expect your benevolence, reader, who I would not dare to call friend. I present you with this little book. If you intend to read it, you should be grateful it is so brief, for the subject it treats is extensive. I assure you that it has cost me great pains to avoid saying more. I have sought to organize the arguments herein and to consolidate evidence that may strengthen them. I do this because I anticipate that they will need to overcome no small resistance. Those who usually address you tend to attempt to draw you to their beliefs and opinions. My pretensions are more modest. I am trying neither to persuade nor convince you. My ambition is limited. I hope that when you have finished these pages, you hesitate and say first to yourself and then to others. Now, this is one that I've struggled with. I desperately want to just put, does this woman have a point? Like, as the question she's asking people to ask. But that feels like it breaks with the time period. And so I wrote in this version, is there any sense in what this woman is saying? And so there's that question of like sharpness, and do you try to modernize it? And do you try to make her cool? And I desperately want her to be cool, but I don't think that she necessarily cared about cool. So that's my spiel. Let me see if there was other questions in this doc, and then I want to give us some time to write together. Oh yeah, whoever said something about microlinguistic gender issues, please send me a email after this if you wish to, because I want to know what that ends up meaning. Or if you, I think that was Rose? Rose, do you have like a minute spiel on what that is?
I feel absolutely ridiculous talking about it in front of
Do it.
Olga because Olga taught me. I mean, you've kind of talked about it in terms of Spanish and English dealing with gender differently, and that in Spanish you can sometimes avoid using a gender, or you have to use a gender in English where you don't. So like when Concepcion Arenal has talked about, like, for example, like al lector is el lector, like the masculine reader, but she's probably not actually talking about necessarily a male reader, or maybe she is. She's just using it a gender neutral way, in a way that we're much more aware of nowadays. But we don't translate that in English. We just be like, to the reader. We don't have to say male or female. And so it's maybe less of a big issue in this work, potentially. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are instances where you've had to decide or you've had to ignore it, but it comes kind of like, I looked at it in terms of poetry in Rosalía de Castro. But yeah, that's what I meant, like the individual, like word level, I guess that's what I meant by microlinguistic.
Oh yeah, that came up repeatedly, and like I hadn't actually thought about to the reader, but there was one of the questions as I was writing the intro essay from either, I can't remember whether it was Juana or Marta, but one of them asked me, who do you think her intended audience was? And I can't remember exactly what I ended up writing, but I think the end kind of conclusion was that it was probably going to be educated men. And she was really speaking to, those who were in power at the time and trying to get people who are maybe on the edge of a more progressive sensibility, give them some things to break their conceptions a little bit so that they could reform into something that, might work a little more beautifully for, women and for society in general, because a big part of her work was that it was not a zero-sum game. It helped everyone, for women to have more power and more security. Yeah. All right. Just gonna make sure how Spanish language facilitated work with the most difficult to translate. I think I've put a tiny dot on all of these. I did a little bit of reading on your work, Olga, and I know that you might have more to say about that question about kind of Galician Spanish and how that influences her language and her work. So I would love if you would say a word or two on that. You probably know much more than I do.
Me unmute myself. Yeah, right. I have to say, I as a Galician speaker, let's say, I don't know much of it in the 19th century, because I don't think she would speak Galician at all. I mean, Galician was for the peasants, if that makes sense. Yeah, educated people would only speak Castilian Spanish, and it was just at that time, a few years after Concepcion Arenal, when Rosalía de Castro started publishing poetry in Galician, that the revival of the Galician letters started. So Galician literature, let's say, didn't exist as something that was worth doing or writing until later. Well, I have to say, in the Middle Ages, yes, of course, Galician and Portuguese was the same language. And all these famous cancioneiros, which were like in medieval times, like, for example, Alfonso X el Sabio, right? He was a king in Spain, and he was writing in Galician. But then, of course, with all these dark centuries, when the Catholic queen and king from Castile invaded, let's say, the rest of Spain, they imposed Castilian. So other languages were forbidden. In places like the Basque Country or Catalonia, wealthy people were speaking the original languages, Catalan and Basque. So the languages were understood as something coming from the upper class. In Galicia, it was just the opposite. The wealthy people were from Castile, and it was basically the peasants in small villages who kept the language alive.
Huh.
So yeah, I suppose there would be some kind of interferences, but I'm not a linguist, and I cannot tell you much about it. Yeah, but that's a little bit of the history behind it.
That is
So she wouldn't have spoken it at home. In other words, it's not the distinction between the formal language you speak when you're at the academy versus what you're speaking at home. It sounds like she wouldn't even have spoken it at home if she was upper class.
Sorry, can you say it again? It seems that
she probably would not even have spoken it at home.
No.
Upper class.
No. I don't think so. Definitely not. I think the social class she belonged to, so to speak, wouldn't be speaking Galician at home either. So it's a matter of status, prestige, and it's really interesting that later on, beginning of the 20th century, when men started speaking, the male patriarchs of the Galician letters, the Galician literature, when they started speaking and writing in Galician, women didn't do it. The language was considered to be too, how to say that, not suitable for a woman. Something that, the peasants speak like that. Don't speak like that. A woman has to speak properly. And even though I was born in 1980, and in many cases my parents spoke Spanish to me because I was a girl. And many of my friends, who were like, they were siblings and they were a boy and a girl. The boy would speak Galician and the girl would speak Spanish. But of course, I don't like to be told what language I have to speak, and I decided to speak Galician. But yeah, I do remember telling my mom, I can understand you, because my parents were speaking Galician between themselves, and they would change to Spanish to speak to me, which didn't make sense, but it was happening all the time, everywhere. So from that moment, I said, well, I will speak Spanish if I have to, but if I can speak Galician, I'm going to be an advocate of the language, because why is it? It's not, in a normal situation, your parents wouldn't change the language. The language they speak, both of them, it should be the same that they speak to you. And yeah, so I was born in 1980. I'm saying that because it was democracy, right? It was not like Franco dictatorship or anything. It was already democracy. And still, these things take time to change, of course. But in the 80s, girls were speaking and were spoken in Spanish more often than boys.
That's really interesting.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But about Concepcion Arenal, I have to say, I'm not a linguist, so I don't know what kind of interferences, let's say, her Spanish could have. What is interesting, and also somebody mentioned Emilia Pardo Bazán, and I suppose it's because that's the author we are covering this week. They decided to write in Spanish all the time, and it was also a matter of status, because they wanted to be read by important people, and that's not you get with if you write in Galician, you are not going to be taken seriously. And even Rosalía de Castro, she wrote poetry in Galician, but her critical essays, let's say, and most of her novels are in Spanish.
So for anybody who might find this interesting in terms of like navigating status and I think the first major essay that Arenal got any kind of attention for, she wrote it under her then like infant or incredibly young son's name. And then they came back to her and were like, so how'd this happen? And ended up giving her, after like a long, I guess, argument, I you know, there was conflict and much haranguing about it, but then she became the first person to get this prestigious writing award for her work. And I find that charming. She was just like, well, heck, you know, one way or another, I'm gonna make my words known, whether it's, which I think is just something important about language in general. Sometimes I have a prof who is doing some stuff around critical language awareness right now, Shauna Shapiro at Middlebury. She's writing a book. If anybody's interested, I think she's going to give some talks on it. So again, shoot me an email. I'll connect you with her. But she was talking about in language classrooms, this navigation that has to happen between welcoming people to write against the grain and giving people the ability to get past gatekeepers, and it being a matter of giving people tools to do both. And so that was just an interesting little aside. And another thing for especially anybody who has not spent much time in a linguistics classroom but who loves language, there's this line, a language is just a dialect with an army and a navy. So that, I can't remember who said that. If somebody here does know, pipe up, but it's just a line that I adore. Oh, sweet, yeah. Zinnia, just shoot me an email and I'll make sure that I get you in touch with Shauna. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left. This has been a joy. Let's do a little bit of writing. You can write down more questions. You can write down things about this talk, but the prompt I'm gonna give us is going to be the person of the future. You know, whatever that ends up meaning to you, whether that means that it's the person that you want to be in 5 minutes, the person you want to be tomorrow, a character, a piece of poetry. It can be in any different language, high prestige or low. You know, take on any perspective that you want. And we'll come back and then people who want to can share a little bit. And yeah, I'm hoping to get us done on time. And so what we'll do is we'll do just a quick 5-minute write. People can stay on cam or not. And I'm gonna set us a timer, so I'll hold time. You don't need to worry about that at all. And I'll give you a 1-minute warning when we're done, when we're headed toward done. And yeah, that's the prompt. Ease into it. If you get stuck or you've got a critic in your head, write down the critic. They're incredibly delightful, protective creatures, and usually once they've yelled it out, they'll let you write something different afterward. So yeah, if you get stuck, write down about how you're stuck. All right, see us all back in 5 minutes. Got a minute left. All right. You are welcome to hop back on video whenever you are ready. And if you are not feeling the video, that is totally fine. You can stay off. If you're wanting to kind of participate in real time, you can just give me like a little thumbs up reaction or toss a word into the chat just so that I know that you're ready and feeling good. Oh, and you're all good. And honestly, another thing, I don't know if any of you will end up seeing me or working with me ever again, but when you're in any kind of an event with me, time immediately becomes stretchy. There is no such thing as late or early anymore. And also, anything that you do to take care of yourself is perfectly fine. You need to go to the bathroom, you need to move around, you need to like jump around in the corner of the room, that's totally fine. And if it ends up conflicting with somebody else's needs, it's their job to talk to me / you, and it's all going to be good. So be gentle with yourself. Okay, so we have 6 minutes left. I want to make sure we end in a coherent place. And so take a second to go into your writing and find a sentence that actually, who has time and brain space to stick around? Because I think that this could be really beautiful to, okay, I do. Okay, cool. Yeah, I do want to. Okay, let's round this out on time then, because there is not a ton. Find one sentence that really sticks out to you and underline it. Maybe 2, if you have a couple that you like. All right. And then once you've got that, we're going to go around round robin style. And if you actively don't want to read, you can just, and I call on you, you can just be like, pass. I won't call on Olga because she's on the phone, which is totally chill. And, oh, my mom says my poem is short. Can I read the whole thing? Yeah, heck yeah, go for it. And if anybody needs to leave, you are free to leave. So my mom's going to kick us off.
Okay, the prompt was the person of the future. She is strong beyond her pain, pained beyond her flexibility, fierce and knife wielding as she sleeps. She builds a home to warehouse her grace, beauty, and loves, and never stops hugging the valet, the waitress, or cashier. She lives in her truth with fierce loyalty. She is a child of God whose values are safety, peace, and connection. Happy International Women's Day, ladies and men.
Awesome.
Evil woman. There you go.
Evil.
Hello.
Beautiful. So my couple lines were tough, brave, and strong like my mother made me. the twin dragons of shame and exhaustion start offering their gold to passing trick-or-treaters. Those were my couple of pieces. All right, Zinnia, go for it.
I forgot to mute myself. Gilded in the service of God, we forgot that our bodies melt with the spring snow. She holds me through the timeless night as we wait for the forever morning. Holy, hands open to the rain.
If you want to make magnanimous gestures to support these incredible readers, oh, yes, so good. Okay, next up, I've got Rose on my screen.
Okay, I didn't write a poem, I just wrote down a few notes. But I said, I want my daughter and her daughter or children to not feel the social imbalances that I have felt as a woman today.
It all counts. That was beautiful. Who's to say that it's not poetry? All right, next up I have Sia. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah. Can I pass, please? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Next up I've got Sophie on my screen.
I'm really sorry. Can I pass as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. No is one of the most eloquent things in the entire world. People forget that. Iris.
Okay. You, the person of the future, that single blade of grass in a tomb, that seashell in the belly of a whale.
Olga, you're next on my screen if you have something.
I don't. I just got I received the call just when we started writing, so I have to pass it on as well. Sorry, I lost concentration completely.
No, there's our poetry. I received the call just as we started writing.
Okay, that's it.
I have
You're
to
right.
pass it on as well.
Correct.
That's
Brilliant.
gorgeous.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's true.
Okay. I have lowercase hill? If you have something. Oh, thank you all. Such a beautiful way to celebrate International Women's Day. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, lowercase hill. Oh, and then last but certainly not least, we have the magnificent Martina Grimaldi. And it's okay if you pass. You don't have to be.
No, yeah, I passed because I have no idea. Sorry, but it was very interesting. But I'm not very good at it. I usually, when I have to write, I just have to wait an hour thinking about something, and then only after a long time I can actually write something. And so I'm very sorry.
No, there is nothing to be sorry for. That in itself is a poem. Sometimes I have to wait an hour to write something, and this idea of thinking that we're bad at things when they take us a long time. Beauty takes incubation time. It takes whole winters, it takes whole years, it takes, when is this translation going to be done? Who knows? Who's to say? And so, yeah, again, time is stretchy. There's no such thing as late or early when we're in some kind of weird portally time warp that I have created, and in collaboration with the internet and whoever made Zoom. So we are ending right on time. Thank you all for being here. I will stick around until everyone has clicked off. So if anybody has questions, let me know. And you all should have my contact info. And if you don't, I'm fairly easy to find. I respond to things soon, eventually. And as Olga knows, that can mean months. But exactly the right thing always seems to end up happening. So I am grateful from the bottom of my heart for all of your ears and eyes and attention and beautiful, beautiful minds. Happy Women's Day.
To you too, and thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Have beautiful days.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rose.
Bye.
Hey, Mama.
Hey, can I stay on for a minute?
Yeah.
Really nice.
Thank you.